on the right knows some mean people. I don't know about you guys. So I want to get get this out of the way up front. On Mother's Day, I started a series on heaven. On Father's Day, I'm starting a series called Mean People. I promise you, dads, there is no correlation, and I'm not trying to send a subliminal message. Also, I want to give another disclaimer. So today, I'm starting a series, and I want to tell you up front, it's going to be a little bit of a cliffhanger. So today is 2 parts, and I'm going to need 2 weeks to finish the thought. So I'm going to leave you a little bit hanging at the end, but I'm going to give you plenty to work with today, all right? So if you come today and say, I lost rock, paper, scissors, I'm never coming back to that church, you're going to have enough to survive today, but it is going to be a cliffhanger. And the reason I tell you that is because I remember going to see Lord of the Rings at the theater. Now, that tells you how old I am. I literally saw it at the theater. Anybody else see Lord of the Rings at the theater? So hopefully you have a strong bladder if you ever do that. So I had no idea. Like, I don't know about you guys. I didn't even know, don't judge me, I didn't even know there was a book series. I didn't know anything about it. Just everybody was talking about this thing called Lord of the Rings. They're like, you got to go. I'm like, all right, I'll go. I went. I had no idea. I sat through 3 hours of this movie. Like, I had no idea how long it was. I didn't know what it was about. And then at the end of the 3 hours, 3 little words came up on the screen that no one had prepared me for. It said, "To be continued." And I was like, you have got to be kidding me. I just gave 3. I had no idea there was multiple. I didn't know. So I just want you guys to know, I was so mad that day. So you've been fairly warned that today at the end of this 3-hour sermon, for those of you who are new, it's not really 3. It's just going to be 2 or something like that. But you've been fairly warned it's going to be continued. Now, let me just say this. No one saw the title, Mean People, in this series and thought, oh, that's about me. What you thought was, I know some people I need to invite to this. That's what you thought. Now, so if you got invited today for the first time, it wasn't about you, I promise. That's not what really happened, but you might want to just have a conversation with the person who invited you just to see. But it was probably just, hey, we want you to experience this church. But what's interesting is I want to kind of go back when we see this, mean people, and what to do about them. I want to go back and say something that should be obvious. It's kind of the upfront thing about this series, but it should be obvious, and it's probably not. There is likely someone somewhere that when they think of mean people, you or I come to their mind. Now, except for the 3 people of you in the room that are annoyingly nice all the time, congratulations on that reality for you. But the rest of us, there's someone, somewhere perhaps, or at least a version of you, maybe the 10-year-ago version of you, when someone says mean people, maybe some of us come to their mind. Now, hopefully it's not the predominant thing that you're known for if you're a follower of Jesus, but at some point, we've all done it. At some point, we've all been mean, whether we did it on purpose or not, and knowingly or unknowingly, we have been this to someone at some point in our lives, and we have to own that. I think the church has to own that. I think we as individuals have to own that sometimes when people think about this, they maybe think about us or somebody that's like us. But here's what I want to say. For the sake of this little 2-week mini-series that I'm doing, I'm not predominantly talking about us. Again, we've all been there. Somebody thinks of us perhaps, but I'm predominantly talking about the mean person that's on the other side of you. So that's what we're going to be talking about, and we all know mean people in our lives. But what ends up happening is there are people in our lives that their meanness or whatever you call it, maybe they're just seem like they're angry, whatever the term is that you would use, they're mean or they're controlling, and they use their anger, or they use their power, or they use their emotions, or they use their position ultimately to control us. All right, so I want to show you an image. You guys remember that time that Kanye stole poor little Taylor Swift's moment at the VMA Awards? I mean, look at that. Poor little Taylor. I mean, look at the look on her face. She's just surprised, and then there's hieroglyphics happening on his head. I don't know what's happening there. But, and listen, I don't know if Kanye's a mean person, but this was a mean moment, right? The whole world. Now, I don't know if you guys know this, but Taylor's current tour will produce $4.6 billion. So she is single-handedly stimulating the U.S. economy. So I'm just saying, she's okay, guys. Like, she survived, everything is fine, she's going to be okay. But this moment, this is just mean. Like, if you were watching it, you felt uncomfortable, like, oh, that poor little girl, her moment is being stolen. So now, let me just say this. No pointing, but we all know some mean people, right? You know some mean people in life. Think about it. Maybe it's the person on 485. You guys are going to know what I'm talking about. It's the person on 485. And amen, right? You need to get into the turn lane, right? And you know they saw you. You had your blinker on. But they acted like they didn't see you, and then they pulled up just a little bit so you couldn't get in. And you're like, ooh, if it weren't for this church bumper sticker on my car. Some of you are like, no, that's why I don't have a church bumper sticker on my car. Exactly. There's just some people that are mean, right? It's the person who stole all the patio furniture from our church. That's just messed up, isn't it? Twice. It happened twice. It was a coordinated effort. It wasn't like a one-person job. Like, they thought it out. They planned it out. Like, it was a thing. Clearly, I have dealt with it fine. I'm all right? But, like, there's just some, like, you just think that's just mean. There's some mean people that kind of arrive in our hemisphere, in our world. It's that competitor. If you're in business, that they went to meet with the person after you met with them, or that they came in to the contractor after you, or they're trying to get the same contract. And in the meeting that you're not in, after the meeting that you had, they throw just enough shade on you or your organization or your company for you to lose the deal, or for you to lose the contract, or for you to not get the bonus, or whatever it is. Just mean people, right? It's the parent. We'll say mom since it's Father's Day. It's the mom that takes and spreads rumors about a teenage kid in order to make their teenage kid look a little better, or says some hateful or untrue things about a teenager and starts this thread of lies so that it elevates the status somehow of their teenager. And sometimes it's worse than that. Like, sometimes it's not. These may feel like somewhat innocent, but sometimes it's more of a villainous thing. Sometimes it's a person that preys on an elderly person. It's someone that preys on our children. For some of you, you have an ex that intentionally set your children against you, said things that broke the relationship. In fact, for some of you, perhaps that's the story or the reality in which you're living in, even in this moment. And what I would say is there are just mean people in this world. There are people that lead out of that. And without realizing it, here's what ends up happening. The mean people in our lives that are in your circle of influence, they tend to gain a measure of control over our lives. They just, and you know this, if you're around mean people, if you live with mean people, if you work with mean people, if they're mean people in your school or on your ball team or whatever it is in the dorm room, they just keep you off balance, right? Sometimes with their emotions, with their anger, they make you feel anxious. They make you feel insecure. You just don't quite feel like yourself. And here's what our tendency is. And maybe it's just me, but I think not. Our tendency is that we want to get even. We want to get even. Like, if you hurt me, if you come at me, if you hurt my family, if you hurt my friends, if you take advantage of me, if you take advantage of my family or my friends, then we're going to get even. If it comes at me, then it's going to come back at you. And ultimately, when we get even, here's what happens. Here's what's happening. When we're trying to get even, ultimately, we're choosing to act like they do. Like, when you move and your natural or first response, your natural thing to do is to get even, what you end up doing is you end up acting like they do. Like, this is why, if you ever been around mean people and you either know and recognize it about yourself, like you recognize, I'm just not myself when I'm around them. Like, I just don't, like, I end up responding, saying things, doing things that's just not me. Or you've had somebody else say this to you. Like, when you're around those people, they're like, hey, you're just not yourself when you're around them. You don't act like yourself, because what ends up happening a lot of times when we try to get even is we end up acting like them. That's the emotional thing that we feel in the moment when we try to get even. But if we can pull back, is that what we even really want to do? Do we want to be in the same category with the person we're getting even with? Because that's what it means to get even. If you're getting even, you're getting yourself into the exact same category as the person that's mean, the person that you don't even want to be like, that you probably don't even like. And so when we get even, we put ourselves in that category. Is that what we really want to do? Or is there perhaps a better solution? Is there something that would be different? What if we would say, hey, instead of getting even, we want to be better? But I put a question mark on it, because do we? Like, do we really want to be better? I think sometimes getting even, it's our guilty pleasure, right? Like, it just doesn't feel very satisfying to be better. We actually want to level the playing ground. So I asked the question, do we really want to be better? But it's a better option. So one of my biggest pushes today and next week is to challenge your initial response to mean people. Just to challenge the initial response that I have, that you have to mean people. Because they're present in this world that we live in. There are people that are just mean. But I want to challenge your initial response. And when I say that, that first thing that comes to your mind. Some of you are like, I'm an extrovert. I already said it, right? Like, there are some of you that, like, there's nothing comes to your mind. It just comes out of your mouth. So whether it's a thing that comes to your mind or it's a thing that comes out of your mouth, whatever the initial response is to mean people, I want to challenge that response, whether it's internal, whether it's external. And here's why. Because mean people tend, again, to keep us off balance. They make us feel like someone we're not. And as long as we're busy getting even, what we end up doing is we enable that behavior. As long as our mode, whether it's subconscious or it's conscious, when we're getting even, we won't get better, and we continue this cycle over and over again. And here's what ends up happening. When we try to get even, we continue to allow whoever the person is, whatever they're doing, we continue to allow it to enable them to control us, and we never get better. So I want to look today at a passage of Scripture that addresses this very thing. In fact, if you want to follow along, it's going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 25. We'll get to the verses in just a second. But I'm going to read an obscure passage that for some of you, you've never heard this passage of Scripture. Others of you, you've heard it and you've perhaps forgotten it. But what many of you will know is you will know at least some of the characters in this story. One of the primary characters in this story is King David. But this was before he was King David. This was when he was actually fugitive David. So most of you know the story. I mentioned this last week in the sermon, but you know the story, even if you didn't grow up in church, of David and Goliath. David kills Goliath. He ends up becoming this national hero for the people. Like, they write songs about him. Like, everybody talks about what David has done. And as his fame rises, the current king, Saul, starts to become a little bit concerned. So it's that whole thing you've heard, you want to keep your enemies close, but you want to keep the people that are rising in fame even a little bit closer, is what Saul's thinking. Because as David's fame rises, he's kind of watching this. He's like, this guy, they're singing songs about him that lift him up and that actually diminish me. And so he started to keep David close. And then in the middle of this scene, and where we're going to pick up in the story, something happens. There's a prophet that goes, and in this private ceremony, this prophet anoints David to become the next king. Now, that's a problem if you're the current king. So now Saul's fears have become real. But it's not just a problem for Saul, it's a problem for his legacy. It's a problem for his entire family, because not only does this mean that Saul's life is in threat, this also means now that his son will not become the next king. And it means that it steals something from his family legacy. And so Saul reacts, and he tries to kill David. David flees with his life, and he ends up becoming a fugitive. And as you can imagine, the person that he has defended, when he stood up against Goliath in Saul's stead, is now coming at him to take his life. And so you just imagine the emotions that David is feeling. Now he's a fugitive. He's running. He's trying to just save his own life. And he becomes very angry. Everything that he loves has been flipped upside down. And so here he is as a fugitive. He starts to gain people around him. He ends up with 600 people around him, 600 men, all their families, all of their stuff. It's like this little tribe, this little group that's moving together. Most of them are army men. They're warriors, but they're all angry as well. Many of them angry at Israel or at Saul. So what you end up having with David is this tribe, and this is how it happens a lot of times. One angry person brings the others. They're like, oh, it happened to you too, it happened to you too. And all of a sudden they have a group, and they're just angry, and they're hurt. And listen, if you have ever been mistreated, in fact, if you're in a situation right now where you're being mistreated, you feel like your children don't understand you. You feel like your parents don't understand you. Someone at work steals your idea. Whatever the thing is, if you've ever been mistreated, then you know the initial response is you become angry. And that's where David and his men are. And they're a tribe, and it's just permeating this group, that they're angry. And in this story that we're going to look at today, David finds an outlet, and his men find an outlet for their anger. So this is where it picks up. In 1 Samuel chapter 25, starting at verse 2, this is what it says. It says, a certain man in Maon who had property there at Carmel was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep. Now, I know that doesn't mean a lot to us, but it just means he was wealthy. Like, man, this means he had a 0-point turn lawnmower. He had all the right things in his garage. He had a lake house. He had all the stuff, right? Ladies, I won't even try to figure it out for you. He was wealthy. This guy had everything that he wanted. And he continues. It says he had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep. It says, which he was shearing at Carmel. Now, this is important because this was payday. When they shear the sheep, this is when they find out how wealthy they really are. This is draft day. This is when you find out how many good players you got on your team. It's the bonus. Like, do we actually get more than we thought? So this is a really big deal. It says his name was Nabal and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband was harsh and mean in his dealings, and he was a Calebite. To which some of you are like, then I must know some Calebites, right? His name actually means heavy. In other places, it's translated fool. So in other words, this guy, he was just difficult. He was living up to his name. He was difficult to live with. He was difficult to be around. He was wealthy. He had everything that he needed, but he was just a harsh man. The story continues in verse 4. It says, while David was in the wilderness, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men, and he said to them, go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name. Say to him, long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours. In other words, David says, hey, it's me. You probably seen some of the famous stuff on YouTube about me. There's songs about me, I've slain this many, and, we won't talk about Saul, how many he's slain. You maybe remember the story about David and Goliath. That was me. It's like a humble brag, right? Like, me, this me, David. And I come in peace. And then watch what happens. It says, now I hear that it's sheep shearing time. This is David still talking. When your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them, and the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. So David says, hey, my army was there around all of your herds. And my men didn't take any of your stuff. And not only did my men not take any of your stuff, just our very presence kept other people from taking your stuff as well. So if you could kind of walk this out with me, Nabal, technically, we helped your bottom line. David's strategizing. He's like, hey, the fact that we were present, we didn't take any of your stuff. Because of the force of our army, these 600, nobody else took your stuff. So honestly, today, it's payday, right? And your payday is a whole lot better because of me. So I just want to say that, and then he continues. So ask your own servants. They will tell you. They were there. He's like, hey, they'll tell you. They'll confirm what I'm saying. Therefore, be favorable towards my men, since we come at a festive time. It's payday. David keeps saying this. Hey, I know you got a lot of stuff. We don't have a lot of stuff. We're kind of on the run. It's a weird situation. Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them. In other words, David's saying, hey, can you hook a brother up? He's like that uncle that just seems to know when you got a bonus, right? They just show up. They seem to know when you got a jacuzzi or you got a new vehicle, and it's like Cousin Eddie. They just show up at the time. This is David. He's like, hey, I just need I happen to see, I know, could you lean in? Could you help us out? Continues. It says, when David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name, and then they waited. Now, this is interesting. Nabal intentionally makes David wait. It's like power meets power, ego meets ego. Now, I want to stop and just note this. I don't know what you grew up with in terms of church and the stories, but most of us at some point have had or read to our kids from one of those little story Bibles. And so if the only image you have of David is the little shepherd boy that was just, even when he was killing Goliath in the picture books, he was so nice, so handsome and well and put together, and feel like you just invite him over to have dinner at your house. But David was a violent man. He wasn't like he is in the kids' storybooks, especially when it came to his enemies. He was violent. He would destroy people. Like he was a warrior. That's who he was. That's what's happening. That's who Nabal is messing with. A violent man that was known to wipe people out who were against it. And eventually Nabal answers. Nabal answered David's servants, and he said, who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Like, he knows who it is. The fact that he says he's a son of Jesse, he knows who it is. This is ego meeting ego. It's like, I don't know who you are. I don't care who you are. And then he continues. Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. You guys are just fugitives. Like, you're just one of many, David. I don't care what songs people are singing about you. I don't care what people are saying about you. I really don't care who you are. It's ego meets ego. Then he continues, he says, why should I take my bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered for my shearers, you hear how much it's about him, my shearers, and give it to men coming from who knows where. It's like, you guys are vagabonds. You're criminals. You have no job. You're fugitives. And he basically says, no, I'm not giving you anything. We have an overabundance, but I'm not giving you any of it. David, maybe it's true that somehow your presence enriched us even more, but I'm not giving you any of this. You can imagine, as ego meets ego, the temperature starts to rise, and this is how it continues in verse 12. It says, David's men turned around, and they went back. When they arrived, they reported every word. And David said to his men, and this is amazing, David said, let us forgive them and pray for them and go on our way. What an incredible, this is a counterintuitive response from David. This is the true Jesus way. He responds in a way that you don't expect. Only that's not how he actually responded. Here's what he actually said. He says, each of you strap on your sword. So they did. And David strapped on his as well. David's internal, external, I can only imagine what the conversation was with the men when they came back to tell these. Remember, they're angry. These guys are angry. They've been mistreated. They're carrying all this pent-up frustration with what's happened to them. They're victims of the life around them. They're on the run. Here they are in this situation. This guy could do good to them, and he doesn't. David's angry. He says, wrong answer. Game on. I will smash you. That's literally the posture that he takes. Now, let me just do a quick Bible trivia. There's a really important note that Samuel, as he records this, puts down. He says, David strapped on his sword as well. Do any of you know where David's sword came from? Scared to answer it out loud? Did somebody say it? Goliath. That's right. Man on the right knows mean people and about Goliath. So it was a Goliath sword. So we talked about last week, David kills Goliath with a rock. I don't know if he's finishing him off. It's his last piece, what it is. He takes his sword, takes off his head. Again, he was a violent man, and then he keeps the sword. This is such an important detail. See, in this story, this sword that David kept of Goliath was a symbolism. It was a reminder. See, in that scene where David steps up to the plate to face Goliath, there were several things that were happening. This sword is a reminder that something was happening bigger than David and Goliath. There was something this was David surrendering to the moment, to something he could not do on his own. There was no chance that he could win this fight. God had to be in the fight for him. And there's another thing that was happening. If you read the story of David and Goliath, David was stepping up to defend the glory of God and the honor of God. Yet now we see him on the other side. In this story, he is not defending the glory and the honor of God. He's defending the ego of David. This sword was to be a reminder that God's protection was there and that David didn't need to take matters into his own hand. Every time he carried this sword, every time he touched this sword, it was to be a reminder of this moment. David, you don't have to take matters into your own hand. You surrender to me, and I will give you victory over things that you cannot imagine. I will give you victory over things that are bigger than you are. And the sword was a reminder of that. And of all people, David knew this. But here's what was happening in this moment. As David is seeing this scene, David is looking through the lens of hurt. He's looking through the lens of anger. And because he's looking through this lens of frustration, hurt, and anger that is very real in his life, it had been done to him. Bad things had happened to David. If you read his story, we might all go, yeah, of course he was hurt. But in this moment, he forgot the power of the sword. He forgot the reminder of the sword that you don't have to take matters into your own hand. Because in this moment, he was looking through the lens of hurt. And I just want to stop and say, this is a good note for all of us. In our lives, Sometimes we forget the things that God has done. And when you're looking through hurt and you're looking through frustration, because it happens to all of us, because there are mean people in this world, sometimes we forget what God is capable of, and we forget what God has done in the past. And he's directing all of this frustration that he has towards Saul, and he's putting it on Nabal. It says about 400 men went up with David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. 400 men. This is a massive overreaction. This is taking 400 trained and very angry soldiers to a farmer, a sheep farmer. This is going to be an absolute massacre. And you know what's happening here? Have you ever heard this phrase that hurt people hurt people? This is what's happening. In this moment, David's responding out of hurt. This whole idea of hurt people, it's when the response is not really about that thing. So when you come downstairs, you step on a Lego, and that really hurts, but then you like tear a door off the wall, right? You're like, all right, maybe it wasn't just, the Lego hurt, but maybe it wasn't just about the Lego, Maybe it was about what happened with your boss today. Maybe it was about the tension with your kids. Maybe it was about the fact that you didn't get the bonus. Maybe it was about the fact that you and your husband or you and your wife aren't getting along right now. Maybe it wasn't just about the thing, right? It's that moment. We've all seen it. We've all done it where your reaction doesn't match the actual thing. When you look at this story, David's reaction doesn't match the actual thing. And this is what we do, right? Sometimes in the moment, we're not just responding to the moment. We're responding to that thing that happened to us when we were 5, that happened to us when we were 12, that happened to us in the first marriage, and we bring it into the moment, right? And we overreact and hurt people. This is exactly what David is doing. He's just pulling all of that out, and he's directing it in this moment. And then it's really interesting. As the narrative continues, as Samuel records this, you can tell that David starts to build a case to justify his actions. Now, I know, of course, none of us do this. Or, of course, all of us do this. What he ends up doing is he's already decided what he's going to do. Like his anger, his hurt, his frustration has already decided. He is going to wipe this guy off the face of the earth. He knows what he's going to do. But then he starts to build a case to justify what he has already decided. And then he even brings God into it. I want you to listen to this. We all do this. This is where you start to have the conversation in your head with your spouse, with your boss, with your coach, with your teacher, whoever it is. Like you're in your mind, you're building a case for the thing you've already decided you're going to do. He says, it picks up in verse 22 of 1 Samuel 25, said, David had just said, it's been useless. All my watching over this fellow's property in the wilderness so that nothing of his was missing. David's like, hey, I'm a noble guy. This is free security. Like, I was helping this little man out. Like, he is so condescending. He's so angry. I was helping this guy out. He has no idea. And then he says this. He has paid me back evil for good. Uh-oh. And it's true. If you look at the story, what Nabal is doing, he is repaying evil for good. So it's not all false. There are truth moments. In fact, this is such a powerful thing. Sometimes the narrative we get to has a grain of truth in it. Not everything that David is saying is false. But remember, he's already decided what he's going to do. And then he says this. He has paid me back evil for good. And then he says, may God. So subtle. We do this all the time. He slips God into it. It's like, hey, you know what? If God is on my side, if God is in the narrative, we do this all the time. If God is my witness, he somehow weaves it in. It's like, hey, it's not even just me. Man, God is on my side in this thing, guys. I've been praying about it. I know this is what needs to happen. May God deal with David, talking about himself in first person. That's when you know it's bad. May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him. He's saying, with God as my witness, God on my side. How many times, I wonder, I know that Chris has done this Chris. How many times do we convince ourselves that God is with us when we're trying to get even? Like, but yeah, God, we got to take care of ourselves. We've got to fight for myself. I wonder how many times we write God into the story of the thing we've already decided that we're going to do. He says, I'll annihilate this guy. He said, I'm literally going to take everything he has, every son, everything he owns, I'm going to annihilate it. And again, if you look back at the origin story, like if you just read the last part of the story, you just read what David's doing, you think, oh man, something terrible must have happened. It's like, then you read the origin story, it's like, oh no, he just didn't give him some extra from sheep shearing day. Like, isn't that the way it works? Sometimes if you can go back to the origin story, like if you've ever been in somebody else's conflict and they're just like at a level 10, and you're like, you're listening to her like, man, where did all this start? And they're like, oh, and they tell you, and you're like, oh, that's all that happened? Like things grow. Things grow. And then we get God on our side and it's even worse. I mean, even God is with him in this thing. And so I want to pause, and at this point, I want to tell you what we have in the story. So you got David and Nabal. You got Nabal, who wants to exchange evil for good. That's real. That's what he's doing. Now, let me just say this. This is another level. Like he needed counseling, right? Most normal people wouldn't do this. Like if something was happening and if there was a good thing that had been done, most of us don't even know people that would intentionally return evil for good. It's like a sadistic thing. But then there's David, and David's response is he's about to return evil for evil. Now, we wouldn't condone that. We're like, yeah, I mean, that's kind of not the thing. But isn't it true? Like, if we're honest, right, today, if we're honest, if you look at this, David's going to return evil for evil. Isn't it true that sometimes it feels like the only option? Right? I mean, because, somebody's taking advantage of your kids. Somebody's taking advantage of your family. Somebody took bread off your table because they stole your bonus check with that idea or whatever they said about you. Sometimes it feels like the only option is to return evil for evil. But there's another option. But it's to be continued. We're going to talk about that other option next week, but here's what I do want to do. I want to leave you with this. Such a wrestling this week, thinking about this reality. I want to leave you with 4 questions, and I want you to think about these, and as tempting as it's going to be to run these questions through the grid of just the other person or whatever's going on, I want you to kind of just circle it up around your life as you think about you. For those of you that are parents, think about your kids. And I want you to circle it up with you, because here's what you need to know. The normal response for humans, in fact, the response that many people would actually say is okay. You get in a Christian community group and they'd be like, oh yeah, kind of like David, God's with me, God's on my side. Yep, you got to, the normal thing is to return evil for evil. Now, maybe we wouldn't say it that way, but that's kind of the normal response. But there's a third response, and there's some questions that lead us to a healthy place. Now, these questions are not original to me, but I want you to process your life and your reality through these this week. In fact, I would say this. These are questions that if you have children, even if your children are not old enough to understand these questions yet, these are questions that you need to remember. Take a picture of these screens, and you need to, when the time is right and your children are old enough, you need to teach these questions to your children. Here's the first one. Do you want to be even with someone that you don't even like? Because you got to remember, at the end of the day, when we're getting even, what we're doing is we're saying, I want to be, or I'm going to be, I'm satisfied to be in the same category as you. Do you want to be in the same category with someone that you don't even like and you don't even want to be like? Do you want your kids to be in the same category with someone you don't like and someone that you don't even want them to be like? This is a different kind of response. And what ends up, and this is why I said I want to challenge my and your initial response to mean people. Because our initial response is to get even, and I'm telling you, it doesn't end the cycle, it perpetuates it. You think, well, we got even, it's over. But then they got to get even, and then you got to get even, and then they got to get even, and it perpetuates the cycle. Second question is this. Wouldn't you rather be ahead? Again, this is not original to me. I think this is so counterintuitive. But we actually start to pull ahead by refusing to get even. I wish I could explain this better. The Jesus way, so often in his kingdom, things are upside down and backwards. In his kingdom, things are different. If you want to pull ahead, one of the ways that you pull ahead is by refusing to get even. And let me just tell you, for me and my personality, I don't like that. Like, this feels like, and I'm not talking about laying down. I'm not talking about someone being a victim. We're not talking about that. This is a completely different thing. This will actually set you ahead of other people. So counterintuitive. But in my life, if someone hurts me, if someone hurts my people, the natural response is to get it back. Someone takes it to you, you want to get it back. But wouldn't you rather be ahead? Here's the third question. This is so good. What story do you want to tell? One day, if you fast forward, whatever you're in, however big, however overwhelming the moment is that you're in, the person is that you're dealing with, however epic it feels like it's the only thing, you wake up thinking about it, you go to bed thinking about it, every single week you have the conversations on the couch with your spouse, with your kids about it, whatever it is, as you fast forward, and one day, that thing, however big it is, it's just going to be a part of the story. What story do you want to tell about this moment? If we can just get out of the moment and ask ourselves, what story do we want to tell? And if we can fast forward to next week, this is exactly what happens. I'm going to introduce a character to this story next week that does this thing with David, that forces David to wrestle with this actual question. David, this thing that you're about to do, I want you to ask yourself, I want you to think about, forces him into this reality of thinking about when this is all just a part of the story that is attached to David, and they tell the story of David. David, what story do you want to tell? Fast forward 10 years, 5 years, as a parent, as a business leader, as a community person, as a follower of Jesus, whatever you're in. When someone tells the story about this moment, what story do you want to tell? If you can come to the end and know the story you want to tell, it will change the way you live in this moment in the story. And then the last one, and this is the solution where you start to pull ahead. And if you're a Jesus follower here today, you know this. And this is so hard. But what would it look like to return good for evil? Not just choosing not to get even, right? But what would it actually look like if we said, no, we're actually going to go in the opposite direction. And we're going to return good for evil. Jesus said that we're to do good to those that mistreat us. Now, some of you, like me, have probably assigned lots of things to Jesus, just like David did to God, that God really wasn't a part of. I wonder how many times we've missed it. I wonder how many times I've missed it. But Jesus said, hey, you really want to pull ahead in this thing. You want to live a different kind of life. What would it look like to return good for evil? This is hard. But this is what frees us. This is what sets us free to a different kind of thing. Listen, getting even, it's natural and it's predictable. Good for evil will lead you one day to live a remarkable story where people go, can you just tell me about those people? What made them tick the way they do? We're going to pick up there next week. So let me pray for us. Father, you were just above and beyond all we could ever imagine. Thank you today that even as we think about dads, that you are the ultimate father, that you know how to give good gifts, that you have moved love in our direction. And Father, I just pray that even today, as we begin to think about this narrative, this idea that there are mean people in this world and that you have placed us in this world to be a light in this world, God, give us grace to know what to do with the moments we're in. God, I pray even these questions, as people wrestle with these this week, as they think about their kids, they think about their life, they think about their job, they think about their college, wherever they're in school, whatever sport team they're on, I pray that, God, you would take these questions and begin to shape in us who you are. God, I pray that we would live out of how you see us. We ask all this in the precious and the powerful name of Jesus. Amen and amen. Hey, I want to give you guys a couple things. We're going to continue this conversation next week, but I want to say this. I say this all the time. I want to encourage you to read the scriptures for yourself. Like so many times, I actually grew up going to church, and there was times where I should have been going back and reading what the pastor was saying, and I wasn't. And there was times where I learned to read it along with the pastor as he was saying it. I want to encourage you. This is found in 1 Samuel chapter 25. There's a couple of chapters in there where you can read the backstory, what happens before and after this. I want to encourage you to read for yourself, and you'll actually get ahead on next week if you want to do that. Again, I want to mention these things. Park days. The reason we're doing these park days for Wamaland Upstreet families is just so you can get to know each other, get to know the parents of the children that your children children are hanging out with in Wombaland. Our summer theme, too, we launched last week, is this idea of be, that God is calling out of you what he's placed in you. And we're going to tell you next week more about it. Just an incredible response from you guys, those of you who were here last week, to this idea. And there's t-shirts back there if you want to purchase one. All that goes to our For Fund, which will support some amazing things, which I'm so excited to tell you about that next week. Again, you guys just leaned in amazing ways already. And also, we're doing something all summer long called Take 5. Basically what we're saying is this. We want you to take 5 minutes in the foyer before you go to your car and just meet people. If you're brand new to our church, we want to meet you. If you've been at this place for a while, we have 2 different services. Sometimes you meet people that were in another service and you never even knew they were a part of your church. So take 5 minutes, have some conversations, and we're going to try and give you reasons to do that. Like today, we got root beer floats in there. You can hang around. We're doing balloon animals next week or one of these weeks. All sorts of things. We're going to have a schedule out where you can see those things all summer long. We've got a lot of activities and things. We want you to make connections so that in the fall, when we launch community groups, if you want to be in one, you will have already formed some relationships. You will know some people, and you'll have some opportunities to do that. So again, root beer floats today. That's going to be fun. No services for us on July 2nd. I just want to get ahead and tell you guys that. We take 2 Sundays off a year just really for the sake of the people that volunteer here, to give them a little bit of time for you guys to be able to enjoy time with your families. And then Juneteenth, I want to encourage you to do a little research. That's a holiday that's happening this week. Some of you don't know about, maybe you do. It's a newer holiday. I think maybe 2 or 3 years. I can't remember where it became a national holiday, but I would encourage you just to dive in. I think it's a step in the right direction of a lot of work that our nation needs to do, and so it would behoove you to do a little homework on it and learn and know that we're making progress. Hey, we love you guys. Hang out in the foyer, meet a few people, and we will see you next week. Thanks.